The Canadian dream is a lie. I'm serious. For decades, Canada has been sold to the world as the place where you go to build a stable, prosperous life. The country with the incredible standard of living, the free health care, the welcoming people, and the wide-open spaces. It was the promise. Work hard, and you will own a home, have a good career, and raise a family. But that promise is dead. And for millions of young, skilled, highly educated people, Canada isn't a paradise anymore. It's a fatal trap. We are not talking about a simple, minor economic downturn or a slight housing correction. We are talking about a full-blown national crisis that is forcing the very people Canada needs most, the doctors, the nurses, the software engineers, the tradespeople to pack their bags and head for the exit. This isn't just a brain drain. This is a catastrophic expulsion of the middle class, driven by a housing market that has become less a stable asset and more a speculative casino. This is the story of how Canada, one of the wealthiest nations on earth, has been doomed by its own policies, and why the dream of owning a simple home is forcing an exodus of its most valuable citizens. The numbers here are genuinely shocking. They are not just anecdotal stories you see on social media. They represent a fundamental structural flaw in the national economy. A recent study out of one of the country's biggest banks found that a high percentage of Canadians under the age of 40 are seriously considering leaving the country because of the cost of living. When asked what the main driver was, it wasn't the weather, it wasn't the politics, and it wasn't the health care. It was the brutal, unyielding, and frankly insulting price of housing. These are not low-skilled workers looking for opportunities. These are the people with degrees, with certifications, with 5 to 10 years of vital, productive experience who are now looking at Australia, the United States, and even the UK and realizing that a comparable salary there will get them a house. While in Toronto or Vancouver, the same salary might only cover a basement apartment and endless, crushing debt. This exodus is fueled by a single compelling thesis. The Canadian housing crisis isn't a natural economic cycle. It is the fatal engine of development, deliberately built on 3 historical and policy failures that created a pressure cooker ready to blow. Failure Pillar 1. The historical failure of supply and zoning. To understand the core problem, you have to go back in time, all the way to the post-World War II housing boom. After the war, the challenge across North America was simple. How do we quickly house the millions of returning soldiers and their growing families? The solution was to build, and to build fast, simple, standardized homes. In that era, the state and the private sector worked together with a clear goal of providing affordable, family-sized housing. Builders were encouraged to innovate, and municipal governments made it easy to convert open land into single-family neighborhoods. But over the decades, the priorities completely shifted. This shift wasn't a sudden, dramatic change. It was a slow, creeping regulatory change that is now the biggest chokehold on the Canadian economy. We are talking about zoning laws. For those who don't spend their days reading municipal bylaws, zoning laws are the rules that dictate what can be built where. The fatal reality across Canada's major cities, especially Toronto, Vancouver, and the surrounding suburbs, is that vast majority of residential land is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. Think about what this means in practice and how destructive this is to any modern economy. If a developer wanted to buy a property zoned for one house and replace it with a low-rise apartment building containing 12 units, they are simply not allowed. The rules say one house, maybe 2 duplex units, and that's it. Even if they wanted to build a 6-plex, which is a perfect middle-density solution, they are often blocked by these outdated rules. This creates an artificial and absolutely brutal scarcity. It doesn't matter how much demand floods into a city, the supply of new homes is artificially capped by laws that mandate sprawling, low-density housing. This is a perfect economic storm because it pits a fundamental human need, shelter, against an immovable regulatory barrier. Let's look at a historical parallel. After the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, the city was literally flattened. Yet, within a remarkably short time, the city was rebuilt. Why? Because the necessity and the drive to rebuild completely overtook the bureaucratic desire for restriction. In Canada, we have a housing crisis that is a slow-motion disaster, but we lack the political will or the structural flexibility to simply let people build homes. Instead, every proposed new development, every attempt to move past the single-family home ideal is met with endless municipal hearings. NIMBY, not in my backyard, resistance, and years of costly delays. These delays are not just a nuisance. They are a fatal increase in the cost of construction. Every year, a project is held up by red tape. The cost of materials and labor goes up, and the developer has to pay more interest on their construction loan. Who pays for that? The buyer. This is a primary mechanism driving the average house price into the stratosphere, ensuring that the only people who can afford the new, limited supply are the wealthy. The middle class, who are desperately needed to run the hospitals and schools, are simply priced out by archaic rules designed a century ago. This system is doomed to fail the people who keep the country running. Failure Pillar 2, the foreign money flood and speculative collapse. The second pillar that has brought the Canadian dream to the point of collapse is the unique treatment of housing as an investment vehicle, particularly by non-local capital. Historically, the purpose of a house was shelter. In the modern Canadian economy, the primary purpose of a house has become a non-performing, tax-advantaged safe for wealth storage. This might sound overly dramatic, but consider this. For years, Canada operated with some of the most permissive regulations in the world regarding who could buy property and how much capital they could bring in. As global capital sought stable places to park money, Canada, with its strong legal system and perception of safety, became a top destination. This foreign demand wasn't looking for a place to live. They were looking for a place to store value. This type of demand is completely insensitive to local wages. A local nurse making $80,000 a year cannot compete with a multimillionaire from overseas who sees $1.5 million house as a bargain compared to prices in London, New York, or Shanghai. This phenomenon caused a massive demand shock in major urban centers. It transformed what should have been a housing market dictated by local wages and employment into a globalized asset class dictated by the ebb and flow of international finance. This shift is fatal to the Canadian working class because their income, earned in Canadian dollars, can never keep pace with global wealth. Now, let's bring in a specific historical example to illustrate how dangerous this is. Look at the Irish property bubble of the 2000s, often called the Celtic Tiger collapse. Ireland experienced a massive property boom fueled by cheap credit and reckless speculation, especially in Dublin. Property prices soared, becoming completely detached from the local economic fundamentals, the actual salaries and earning power of the Irish people. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, the bubble burst, leading to a catastrophic collapse of the entire banking system, a government bailout, and a decade of austerity. In Canada, the dynamic is different. It is driven more by foreign capital than solely by domestic banking debt, but the underlying principle is the same. The price of housing is completely detached from the utility value of shelter and the earning power of the average person. The house is a financial product, not a home. Governments, both federal and provincial, have tried to implement minor measures like foreign buyer taxes, but these are too late. The investment mentality is already baked in. Domestic speculators, seeing house prices only ever go up, leverage themselves to the hilt, buying up secondary properties and rental units. These people aren't greedy in a moral sense. They are rational economic actors responding to a doomed set of incentives. When you see a stable asset guaranteed to appreciate at 10% per year while the regulatory environment ensures supply will remain low, it would be irrational not to speculate. This speculation fundamentally removes supply from the market and jacks up the cost of the remaining supply, creating a feedback loop of unaffordability. When you see a house sell in a bidding war for $500,000 over the asking price, that is not a family buying a home. That is an investor inflating an already volatile market. And it's this volatility and this detachment from reality that has made Canada unlivable for its best and brightest. Failure Pillar 3. The immigration paradox, a self-inflicted wound. The third and perhaps most tragic pillar of this crisis is the self-inflicted wound, the immigration paradox. Canada's federal government has, over the last decade, relied on very high, ambitious targets for immigration. The goal is simple and, on the surface, smart. Use immigration to grow the labor force and fuel gross domestic product, GDP. Canada is an aging country, and new blood is needed to keep the economy vibrant and fund the social safety net, like healthcare. But here is where the plan becomes fatal. The government has been aggressively importing demand without making a single corresponding move to increase supply. Think of the economy like a plumbing system. The federal government, through immigration policies, has opened up the tap, a massive flood of new, highly educated, highly ambitious, and often highly skilled people. This is the demand side of the equation. Meanwhile, the municipal governments, tied up by the archaic zoning laws we discussed, have kept the drain, the supply of new housing, choked and restricted. The result is pure economic pressure, a supply-demand imbalance so severe that it has turned housing into a zero-sum game. When you bring in 1 million new residents every year, but only build enough homes for a quarter of that number, the doomed outcome is an explosion in prices and rents. And who does this hurt the most? It hurts the international students and the new immigrants themselves, who come to Canada with the promise of a better life, only to find themselves paying exorbitant rents to live in shared, often substandard conditions. But it also directly hurts the established Canadian middle class, because they are the ones competing for the same finite housing stock. This is a disastrous example of poor planning and a complete lack of coordination between different levels of government. The federal government looks at the total GDP numbers and smiles, seeing growth driven by population, but it completely ignores the per capita GDP, which is the real measure of a person's well-being. When you divide the national wealth among more people without a corresponding rise in productivity or quality of life, everyone gets poorer. And the cost of housing is the cruel mechanism by which that wealth is redistributed away from the working class and into the hands of asset owners and speculators. This policy has effectively weaponized the housing market against the people the government claims to want to help. They are trying to solve a labor shortage with immigration, but they are simultaneously creating a massive affordability crisis that drives out the very workers they are trying to attract and retain. The nurse who came from India 10 years ago to make a life in Canada is now leaving for the U.S. because her Canadian salary, once adequate, is now completely eaten up by a rental market gone mad. It is a vicious, fatal cycle. High immigration drives demand. Restricted supply drives prices. High prices drive skilled locals away. The government responds by increasing immigration to replace the departing locals. And the pressure starts all over again. This is not a sustainable path. The departure of highly skilled workers isn't just a sad anecdote. It is an economic time bomb that is set to detonate the productivity of the nation. When a country actively discourages its nurses, doctors, tradespeople, and teachers from staying, the very social services that make Canada a desirable place to live begin to collapse. This is the point of no return. Imagine a city without enough nurses because they can't afford rent. Imagine a major infrastructure project delayed because the engineers and skilled tradespeople have all moved to Texas or Sydney, where their paycheck stretches further. This is already happening. Hospitals are short-staffed, construction projects are delayed, and the quality of life for everyone, even the asset-rich, begins to decline. The true cost of the housing crisis is not the price of a house. It's the price of a functioning society. It's the loss of the intangible human capital that makes an economy innovative and resilient. The moment a country decides that maximizing asset prices is more important than ensuring a stable, middle-class life for its most productive citizens, that country is doomed to lose its economic leadership. Canada has chosen this path. It has chosen to prioritize the appreciation of property values over the retention of human talent. The historical failures in zoning, the speculative flood of global capital, and the uncoordinated immigration policy have all converged to create an environment where the most rational economic decision for a skilled worker is to simply leave. The Canadian dream is now just a sales pitch in the smart. Skilled people are realizing it's time to cash out and find a country that values their labor more than it values the abstract price of a piece of land. So, what have we learned? The massive exodus of skilled workers from Canada is not a mysterious phenomenon. It is a predictable, fatal outcome of 3 decades of policy failure. First, we saw the historical chokehold of archaic zoning laws that have artificially capped the supply of housing, ensuring that only single-family homes dominate the landscape, no matter the demand. Second, the speculative flood of global capital that transformed homes from places to live into non-performing investment vehicles, making local salaries irrelevant in the global bidding war. And third, the immigration paradox, where the federal government's drive for population-led GDP growth created a demand tsunami that local infrastructure, held back by the first 2 factors, was never prepared to handle. This has resulted in a national crisis where the middle class is effectively being expelled, creating a dangerous feedback loop that will ultimately lead to a decline in Canada's ability to maintain its high standard of living. Until the core issues of supply are aggressively fixed and the housing market is treated as a shelter first and an investment second, the talent will continue to flow out, leaving behind only the consequences of a doomed economic experiment. If you want to see the long-term impact of a housing collapse on a nation, check out our next video.